Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Yashwendra Singh, Executive Editor of CIO, and also the moderator of this extremely topical session on building future-ready enterprises, organized jointly by CIO and Intel. These are unprecedented times, with enterprises looking to navigate through a tough business environment caused by COVID-19. The pandemic has paralyzed several businesses, thrusting CIOs to the center stage with some challenges before them, becoming caretakers of customers, enablers of employee experience, and handholders of business operations in times of crisis. However, the situation also gives them an opportunity to be change leaders and drive digital transformation-led initiatives across their organizations. Our power-packed panel today will discuss various aspects of how to build a future-ready enterprise. Please join me in welcoming our August panelists of the day. We have with us, in alphabetical order, Mr. Abhijit Mazumdar, CIO TCS, Ms. Archana, popularly known as Archie. She's the Senior VP and CIO at Intel Corporation. Before Intel, she has held CIO roles at Hewlett-Packard, Baker Hughes, Ingersoll Rand, Timex Corporation, and United Technologies Corporation. Archie holds degrees in Bachelor of Science in Business Administration and Management Information Systems and a Master of Business Administration. She also serves on the board of directors of East West Bank and Cognizant. We also have with us Mr. Bishwanath Ghosh, CIO Mahindra & Mahindra, Mr. Deepak Sharma, CDO Kotak Mahindra, Mr. Prakash Malia, Vice President and Managing Director, Sales and Marketing Group for Intel India, and last but not the least, Mr. Shiv Kumar Bhasin, CTO NSE, who's going to join us in some time. Welcome, panelists. Since I introduce all of you in alphabetical order, I will set the ball rolling in the same order. I'll start with you, Mr. Mazumdar. So the COVID-19 pandemic has unleashed unprecedented disruption, whether it is society, government, or enterprises. How has the current crisis impacted enterprises in general, and what do you think are the challenges that enterprises face as they operate in the new reality? We've seen how business models have shifted. Brick and mortar educational institutes imparting education now digitally. How do you see this change impacting our organizations?
Well, Yashwendra, first of all, thanks for having me here, and thanks to all my colleagues here who agreed to join us. I hope everybody is safe and everybody is healthy wherever they are. What you ask is a very interesting question. 6 months, almost 6 months now, has completely transformed the industry. As we look at the future, we will see things go completely differently. And the impact has not only just been financial, it has been operational as well as emotional. The things that I see as major trends that affect us as we look at the future, as we call the new beginning, would be multiple, right? The first and foremost, I think, the way we approach work itself in every enterprise is going to transform. We have been all talking about, working from home, as we all are doing right now. In TCS, we call it, secure borderless workspaces. That's an acronym. SBWS, we have been talking about it, but that's just the beginning, and that itself impacts how you engage with your employees and your employees' well-being and all that. But more importantly, what is going to be critical is to focus on an enterprise which is resilient and which is adaptable, right? And technology has a huge part to play in making enterprise to be adaptable and resilient, and they are very, very critical, right? We are looking at operating models which will be increasingly be contactless and increasingly be done remotely, again technology driven, which is again going to significantly transform the industry. And more importantly, I think to conclude, what I would say is many industries would have to reinvent the way they operate. Take travel and transportation, for example. As you know, international and domestic flights have been on the ground for the majority of this last 6 months, and things would not be the same it was in the future, near future. And I think that would need these organizations to rethink how will they engage with their stakeholders and with their with their users and customers. So I
Sure.
think those are the key trends that I see going forward. Where I see everything going is it's going to be a smart world where you will depend significantly on AI and machine learning. It would be a cloud-driven world where we would be using a lot of cloud computing technologies, and it will also be a machine-first world where the machine will get the first right of refusal for any work that needs to be done. So that's what I see for the future.
Sure, sure, Mr. Mazumdar. I'll move over to Archie now. Archie, like Mr. Mazumdar just said, companies will have to rethink, reinvent themselves. I mean, I'm sure nobody would have thought, switching over to enterprise-wide virtual collaboration or supporting work from home at such a large scale. Your thoughts on this, Archie?
Yeah, look, first of all, let me just say I'm delighted to be here on this panel today with all the distinguished colleagues here. So thank you for having us. I would add on to the comments. I think, look, from a challenge perspective first, before we go into the remote work, I think we see a couple of things, right? One is just fractured supply chains are leading to disruptions, right, in procurement and production. And I think we're seeing that companies are, struggling with how to source, raw materials, components, and that is, impacting in some cases, the viability or the longevity of certain businesses. I think the second is really around the shifting of the customer priorities, if you will. You're seeing winners, and you're seeing, some companies, quite frankly, that I think will struggle to survive. And again, part of it is the types of products and services, and whether there's demand in this type of in the current situation. But also, I think those customers that are able to react, much faster to changing demands, I think will be the ones that will, come out stronger. And I think in terms of the follow-on, comments around, running operations with employees working remotely, look, I think we've learned over the last, several months that many jobs can easily be carried out remotely. Some do obviously require on-site presence, but I think companies that were significantly ahead to begin with, I think this was a pretty fast shift for them to go almost entirely remote. And I think for companies that had not started down that journey or had been slower to make that change, I think they've had to really ramp up in a very short period of time to adjust to that. And I think a lot of it will depend on a company's ability to really refactor, right, and think about how they get work done in a very different way. I think there's an absolute opportunity, right, to reduce the number of employees that come into an office manufacturing, support environment. But it will, again, I think, depend on the company's mindset, how quickly, they're ready to adapt to this. And, also, I think some of the things that, companies do in conjunction, with this whole work from home. And what I mean by that is it's not just about the mechanics, right? It's also about managing the people aspects and employees' well-being. The impact of new working conditions, while we all think that, it's wonderful to be able to work from home, I think there are some human aspects, right, that we all have to deal with, which is the working hours are, expectations, I think, are much greater availability. You're there 24/7. It's not like, you're traveling or some of the other things that you normally, assume that people aren't available all the time. Now there's a feeling that you're there all the time. There's overlap with managing, both the family and the work environment while, the majority of the family is at home. And so I think there are concerns around health and, what happens with being locked down to the extent that we have been, how that adds to the stress level, the health of an employee. And I know companies are thinking about, different types of programs and help to assist employees through that. But I think that could, obviously be a challenging, a challenging aspect of this remote work.
Sure, Archie. I'll move on to Mr. Ghosh now. Mr. Ghosh, like Archie just said, fragmented supply chains, coming from an automobile company, manufacturing, I'm sure you would be feeling the heat from this challenge for sure.
Yeah, actually, initially we had, first of all, thank you for inviting me, and extremely happy to be here. And, I think very apt topic that you have chosen for me. So yes, initially we had, a lot of apprehension because we have quite a lot of manufacturing, and particularly if I look at the Mahindra Group, more than 55% turnover comes from manufacturing. And automotive and tractor, two key manufacturing areas, both require supply chain. And automotive supply chain, I think everybody is aware. We were very apprehensive, but then things are things move very fast, and this is the kind of time when we thought it will be difficult for the whole supply chain to get kicked in. See, manufacturing in the end is a good part of manufacturing is extremely physical. You cannot virtually produce a car, right? But then what so this whole pandemic actually has busted a lot of myths. What was considered very physical actually has become virtual, and people have accepted. When we always considered, let's say, for example, logistics people to be close to the manufacturing, because they need to coordinate, they need to ensure the material supply is there. Then there are a whole lot of ifs and buts and changes in the order sequencing and stuff like that. But that's not the case. Lots of logistics people, almost 90% of the logistics people today are actually working from home, and and the very few who are absolutely required at the manufacturing location is actually present in the plants and the offices. If I look at it, all our plants have started operating, both tractors and automotive, all of them. Of course, the volume is less because there are still restrictions on number of people you can have. Maintaining social distancing, for example, in a plant is not very easy. So we have to limit the number. So because of that, the whole capacity utilization is less. But what we figured out that the whole supply chain actually can gear up to the new environment very quickly. And all of our suppliers actually have they have also kicked in, right? And both sides of the supply chain, the supply side as well as the delivery side, both have kicked in, right? So I think at the end, I would say a lot of myths have been busted, right? And having said that, people who considered that this is something you cannot do it any other way because this is physical, that has moved. So we will definitely see a lot of automation in a lot of those areas. So things that you can actually do remotely maybe is a very good candidate for automation, because we never thought that, because we thought we categorize that work, that activity as physical, right? So we always probably back of our mind it was not a good candidate for automation. But if you're able to do it remote, be a good candidate for automation. So we will see a lot of that as we go along.
Sure, Mr. Ghosh. Coming to you, Mr. Deepak Sharma, what do you think are the challenges for a bank? Obviously, you don't have challenges of manufacturing, opening up factories like Mr. Ghosh. What do you think are the typical challenges for a bank going forward?
So I think, like other industries, every industry has its own share of challenges. I must say, we may be sailing in different boats, but we are all passing through a storm. So I think that is something that's true for all of us, irrespective of whatever business we do. So I think when I look from financial service perspective, I think one of the things we all agree is that we don't know how much of what we are leaving behind we will rediscover once probably the situation becomes better. And I think with that kind of uncertainty, there are 4 or 5 things I would say from a financial service industry we are looking at. One is the definition of trust itself is getting redefined. Because at the end of it, financial service is all about trust. When you put your money, when you do your transaction, the whole experience. And the trust where technology will increasingly play a much larger role, but still keeping the tech part along with the touch, because the human touch or assisted or empathy for customer is not going to disappear just because we are going to bring in a lot more of technology to deliver solutions or experience to customer. And I think that would be one challenge as to how financial service will continue to provide the value that you get out of touch as we increasingly look at more of tech. I think the second thing we are already witnessing is there are three dimensions in financial service. Obviously, customer is core and employees who offer all the banking to customers. Now, this experience of going through a prolonged COVID uncertainty had a severe impact on the way customer behavior, customer preference has changed. And we envisage the behavior that is impacting other industries will also reflect in financial service. For example, people will not buy large fixed assets anytime soon. That means if you're looking at a large house or a mortgage, you probably will defer that decision for some time. Or probably, as Archie was saying, when people will travel less, you will not have a lot of expenses around, say, their credit cards, because a lot of that goes when you travel internationally, you make large purchase. Or probably you'll not have a travel insurance. However, you will see a lot more on people looking after their risk part of the coverage. So be it a term plan, be it their health risk. So I think this customer preference will see a shift, and a lot of this will reflect on how people deal with their money. Because at the end of it, financial service is about the attitude towards money and the risk averseness or concerns that customers have. And if I look at this shift, a lot of products and services will get attuned to what customers would like to do with their money. And I think that fundamental shift I expect will continue to happen. The other part, as I mentioned, is employees, because as we see more and more employees continue to work from home or remotely, ability to provide this service, connect to customer in a secure manner, would increasingly become a much bigger investment, and firms will have to make a choice between continuing to either invest on work from office infrastructure or reduce the work from office infrastructure and reinvest that amount or saving into the work from home infrastructure. So I think the prioritizing of the cost and investment between these two infra will start finding a balance as to how much do you put on which side of it. I think obviously we will see increasingly a lot more in financial service around the fraud, risk, and security, because we have already started to read a lot about non-state actors and state actors trying to get into either hacking or privacy issues, data breach, and I think protecting the entire ecosystem. And when I say ecosystem, I'm not just talking about employees and customers. But we have a lot of partners who work with us very, very closely on the development environment and outsourcing of various ecosystem. Or today, for example, a lot of merchants where the payment gets initiated. And a breach anywhere in the ecosystem can impact both the customer and as well as the trust in the entire financial service ecosystem. And I think the last I would say is firms will relook at their capital allocation. And when I say capital allocation, I'm talking of financial capital, I'm talking of human capital, and I'm also talking of intellectual capital. Because there are areas in human capital, certain skills will start becoming even more important than they were, which is right from analytics, data, risk, security, fraud, technology development, even empathy. A lot of them, they do not understand the empathy in the digital world. And similarly, I think the capital allocation from financial will become, because financial capital is going to be scarce. It's not that companies are going to put massive investments, at least till the time they see the recovery or they have a view for how future looks like. And that means that a lot of reprioritization of projects, initiatives, infrastructure will go through a zero-based budget where everything will get questioned, because we do not see this as a continuation of the world that we lived in till March. And similarly on intellectual capital, because I think there will be battle on how firms develop their core competence to survive and see the future, as the future will look, as I said, a lot different than what it is.
Sure, great inputs, Mr. Sharma, there from a BFSI perspective. I'll now include Mr. Malia in the conversation. What follows the pandemic will not be a return to pre-COVID business practices, but more likely a new era of, defined by fast-changing shifts in business models, cultural norms, and customer behaviors. Mr. Malia, can you talk about key business and technology trends that are emerging now?
Thank you for having me. A very good evening to the panels as well as the audience who are joining us today. So when I look at this, I look at it in three different ways. And this is on the basis of interactions I've had with customers and partners, as well as my own reflection for the last 3 or so months. And I realized it's close to 6 months that the world has shifted when Abhijit in his comments underlined it, and it is true. And the first part of this is what I term leading through crisis. And when I say that, I really mean that in these times, the purpose for the company matters. And that purpose needs to be a very fine balance between taking care of health and well-being of employees and communities, as well as taking care of customers and partners during this crisis. And when you are leading in these times, it is also important as a leader, you are demonstrating genuine empathy and generosity, because that needs to come through in your interactions, not only with your employees and communities, but also with your customers and partners. And Deepak talked and briefly touched on it as well, because think about it this way. There has never been at least a time in my career when I have had to lead teams at a time when they are genuinely concerned about their health and safety, or as well as their family's health and safety. We have never had that kind of experience. So it is requiring a very different muscle. And you're actually leading in times when you will have a lot of disruption happening. And I'll tell you from an India point of view, what that disruption means. I have no doubt in my mind that in the next 5 to 10 years, the ecosystem will be dramatically different from what it is today. And short term, it could mean digital payments accelerating, contactless solutions accelerating. But longer term, when you look at the 5 to 10 year horizon, what could happen is very difficult or challenging verticals would get transformed because we have no other choice but to transform them. Education is one example. Transportation is another example. Healthcare is another example. So they will look vastly different from what it is today. So that's the first piece of leading through crisis. The second one, what I think about, is how will the infrastructure shape? And some of the panelists also made comments here. And I will look at it from the point of view of, in cash-strapped situation, what will companies do? They will manage through that cash. And that would mean as a service or subscription models will accelerate. You can see that in the results of cloud companies globally. Cloud is accelerating. And that in consumer terms, consumer companies would say shampoo sachets, very small amount of buying, right? In technology terms, it is cloud or as a service. So as the pandemic unfolds, I see an opportunity for CIOs to really reimagine how they invest in infrastructure. So you could think about longer term, it could mean cloud gaming as a service, transportation as a service. And with tools like AI and 5G coming through, transportation as a service is a very material trend longer term. And the last part would be how we work. And Abhijit touched on it as well. We will absolutely reimagine how we will work. And a lot of companies, Indian companies, have stated goals towards getting to that point of view. But I will give you another point of view in that. And that is a great thing for the country, simply because for the first time in a long time, companies will not be limited geographically for the talent that they need to go hire. Now, you will see jobs going to the talent wherever they are based, rather than the other way around. This would mean no matter whether you are in a small town or a big town, you have equal access to the opportunities. That is a fantastic thing because we are one of the youngest countries in the world. We are the software powerhouse of the world. We have an opportunity to really transform Fortune 1000 companies because that digital transformation business would get driven out of India because of the service providers like TCS, Wipro, Infosys. So we really have a material opportunity in front of us, and that is going to get crunched in terms of trends versus taking 5 or 10 years. It'll probably take next few months to go unfold. So that's how I look at it. How do I lead through crisis as companies? How do we reimagine infrastructure? And it'll go to as a service models more and more. And how do we reimagine workforce and informal workforce accelerating as a trend?
Sure, Mr. Malia. So cloud is accelerating. There's a lot of potential, a lot of opportunity in waiting. Mr. Mazumdar, what are your thoughts here? What technologies do you think will become more important, more critical as we go forward? Collaboration software, probably analytics. What are your thoughts here, sir?
So I think Prakash did talk about a wide range of technologies, and I think all of them are quite interesting. But from my perspective, cloud is definitely one of the go-to places. That's near-term, immediate. Something if you have not thought about it, you definitely need to think about it now and adopt wholeheartedly. If you have adopted it, you need to look at widening your gamut, look at multi-cloud, look at containerization, and essentially leveraging the full capabilities of the technology that provides to you. But more importantly, I think collaboration is going to be critical. And as we do work remotely, what we miss is the so-called water cooler talks, right? I mean, more business gets done next to the water cooler than in formal meetings, in my experience of over 25 years in this industry. So I think we all need to see, we all will see the collaboration software evolving very fast, and create those spaces for having offline conversation between colleagues, and that's clearly one of the things that I'm looking for. Analytics, but more importantly, AI and ML is going to be very, very critical. I think we all have been sitting on huge amount of data. Even I'm sure Mr. Ghosh will agree, manufacturing companies like Mahindra is sitting on top of huge amount of data that they can use to come up with new solutions and new ideas to really reinvent themselves. And I think that's definitely one of the areas where a significant amount of investment will happen. Mr. Sharma is already in a BFSI space where they do already use more than I use of AI and ML, but I'm sure he will be using quite a bit more. So I think that is one of the key things. But as we look into medium to longer term, I think 5G is going to be transformational. We have been talking about having access to talent any part of the country, really any part of the world, and 5G is going to really accelerate something like this. Virtual reality, augmented reality is going to really change the way we collaborate with each other in a medium to long term time span. So I think these are all technologies to be looked at. What we really need to do is not look at technologies per se. I mean, not to use the technologies as a buzzword, but to use those technologies to really look at what we are doing on a day-to-day basis and see, can we really reimagine ourselves? Can we really reimagine the product or services that we are offering to our customers? And can we reimagine the workspace that our associates are working in? I think that is going to be critical for success as we go forward.
Sure, Mr. Mazumdar. Everybody's talking about cloud, and I would just want to share some statistics here. According to an IDC report, 64% of firms in India are going to increase demand for cloud computing, and nearly 56% of the firms are going to embrace the cloud platforms as the new normal. So definitely, very valid points that cloud is going to be the new darling. It has always been, but going forward even more. Archie, coming to you, your list of top technologies.
Yeah, look, I think I would echo some of the comments that have already been made, but obviously, through the pandemic, the cloud was probably, one of the most relevant in terms of rapid scale and expansion of capability and capacity. So I think that even though it's been, around, and I think most CIOs have had a cloud strategy or a hybrid, cloud strategy for many years, I think we will see that as, that acceleration, I think, at a whole new level, given, the past few months. I think the second area, which I think Prakash started on that conversation here a little bit, but if we look at, companies and where they play today, and then which ones, I think are going to be either opportunistic, struggle to survive, or, they'll see peaks and valleys, right, on demand based, in terms of maybe some short-term bursts with the new environment, and then maybe a slowdown. If you look at all of them, right, I think no matter which sector you're in, right, if you're in healthcare or education, you're going to have to reinvent yourself, right? I think the need is going to be great, but I think the amount of disruption and advancement that's going to be needed if we're to be in this mode for some period of time, I think is going to be pretty huge. I think if you look at industries that have just been, I think completely halted at the moment, whether it's travel, it's entertainment, et cetera, I think every one of these, right, there's going to have to be a thought around, as you move into the future, how do you reinvent, how do you create that disruption, within your own businesses and for industries as a whole. And I think as that happens, I think technologies, with, data, right, everything is data driven. So I think AI, machine learning, I think all those things, whether it's insights or to drive to different business models, and the way that you change the way you offer, products and services, everything from pricing to, new business models that maybe, move more from CapEx to OpEx. I think all those things are going to really cause a big disruption. And I think that's where, some of the, what I'll say, newer technologies, I think really become relevant in terms of helping, to get there. I also think as we do all this, right, security is going to be on people's minds as we shift more potentially to the cloud, as we look at, broader sharing of data and ecosystems and putting these types of models and trust into them. And I think security, the amount of integrity and credibility, right, in our ecosystems, the way that we exchange with each other, I think that'll be another area that I see, a greater need for technology to evolve.
Right. Sure, Archie. Mr. Ghosh, some of the technologies that come to my mind, when it comes to manufacturing, robotic process automation, definitely when we talk about contactless work, analytics, not just to add to the top line, bottom line, but also to open up new revenue streams. Anything else, sir? What comes to your mind when you talk about new technologies in manufacturing?
So it's a very opportune time when the whole pandemic has come in from a very different perspective. I'm referring this to. If you look at, in any organization, the change management of any application is actually it takes the maximum effort in order to push you through. And that's where people actually have opened up their mind. And that's what I see. People are willing to accept a very different solution because people have very recently seen something that was just not possible has become possible. For example, as I said, lots of people thought in a company like ours, which has a very large chunk, a group like ours, rather large chunk of manufacturing DNA, work from home is, kind of doesn't suit a manufacturing unit. That's not something people are saying this. It goes to the extent I hear a lot of my HR heads of different companies saying, no, I need to do this. Opening office is not my immediate priority. I'm able to manage everything from this. I would not have heard 3 months back. Okay? So that's just an example how things have opened up. Now, going forward, what would be required is, I think, pretty much Abhijit, Archie, everybody else kind of enumerated. I'll just try and give different perspective. So all of those, what we termed as emerging technology, many of them have emerged, but now they will become really mainstream. Yeah. So be it artificial intelligence, ML, AR, VR, all of these would definitely become mainstream very soon. Couple of things that we will also see people would be reluctant to do high capex investment, for example. People would look for resilient and flexible or scalable models, and that's where the cloud fits in, because it's the immediate solution that we have in terms of getting a very easy and flexible solution that we can and do, and it's all from infrastructure as well as a lot of algorithms and applications that you can use, which kind of tunes with this. So that's what people will look for, the organization would look for, and adopt to that. One thing I have a little bit of a doubt, particularly from Indian perspective. So far, we have done well on the network, right? And then I'm talking about the network, not on the corporate side, but on when you are working from home. Pretty much we have done well. There have been some issues in few places. Some places the issues continue. But as we move forward and actually scale up these solutions, network will become a problem sooner than later. Particularly the fluid that is available and at the edge when people are working, what is needed. I think that is something. I don't know when 5G will coming. I think Abhijit was referring to 5G. If that comes, great. But otherwise, but that I still think is nothing less than 18 months to 2 years away for any kind of reasonable coverage for India. Besides the huge cost and all that, one thing good that has happened, and I have spoken to friends, the whole problem of getting the 5G in an Indian context was also which are the customers who are willing to pay more. Now they'll have a whole lot of customers who would be willing to pay more, because there are applications which will now be designed which can leverage 5G and deliver that one. So that's an opportunity for 5G. But that's probably the solution in hand for large bandwidth. But that's something that will be required. Short term, there may be some pain because solutions will come faster than 5G or higher bandwidth. There may be short term pain on that front.
Sure. Sure.
Sure, sir. Sure. So, Mr. Sharma, I saw Kotak Mahindra Bank was one of the first ones to bring about eKYC, contactless KYC. And also, when we talk about analytics, people say data is the new oil, and then we say that analytics is the refinery. Your thoughts on this, sir?
Yeah. So I think in a time like these, a lot of initiatives gets much faster adoption because there is an inherent demand from the business and customer side to find alternatives to the way we were doing business, right? So when we launched India's first video-based KYC account, I think the whole idea was in current context when we do not want to meet customers face to face, or customers do not want to visit branches. How do we still enable the customer onboarding? And thanks to the change in the regulation from RBI, we could roll out a video-based KYC where we can onboard customers remotely, and I think it has found a very good traction. But as I speak, I think there are a few things that is fundamentally changing is how we wire an analog world through digital technologies. And I think this is one of those experiments among many other. For example, the contact center staff couldn't turn up for work, right? Because so we had to quickly move a contact center solution where employees can take calls remotely from their home. This never happened in India because the DOT never allowed you to run a call center from home. You had to turn up at a location where the call center service was given. So we had to quickly make that available. We had to ensure that customers find a conversational banking bot where we looked at customers who have a higher propensity to use a conversational banking bot versus those who will still like to get a human assisted kind of an interface. And I think this is where again, analytics and AI helps you understand micro segmentation, personalization, look at which customer segment can be best catered through a particular channel without value erosion. And I think while this is all the way digital is getting wired into analog, but there is also a pure play digital world. And I think video-based KYC was one such thing that we looked at it. But I will just go a little ahead, Yashwendra. I think fundamentally what's changing is, and I think I heard other colleagues also speak about it, we are formally moving from a capex to a opex-based kind of a model. Because in an uncertain time, nobody wants to commit large investments on a project where the value is uncertain over short to medium term. And I think we will start seeing a lot of our bets, which will start looking at SaaS and looking at product to a service and capex to a opex. So I think fundamentally we will start seeing a lot of such shifts.
Sure.
The second thing we are seeing is, I think some of the colleagues also spoke, but fundamental issue is on culture, connect, and conversation in these times. Because when there are roles which are very task-oriented, it's still easy to carry the way we currently are doing. But when there are communication to customers, to employees, the teams that have to connect together, I think we still haven't solved for those problems. So while I think we are increasingly using videos and cross-collaboration platform, but that's not sufficient. And I think that's still a problem in my mind we still have to solve. For example, we did video for onboarding customer, but I'm saying today video probably will be the default way for everybody to connect with everyone at any given point in time.
Sure.
And I think that some of these things will see a much higher adoption as we go along and see how similarly we see a facial recognition solution in our video KYC platform. But now facial recognition will start becoming the way to look at fraud, risk, security, adaptive authentication across financial transactions. So I think some of these stack that we discovered and we started to implement in sachets will become mainstream and core to how financial service will address issues around risk, or probably like cloud, which is a subscription versus your data center, or probably how do we manage the re-architecting for cloud using the Dockers or containers and Kubernetes to not just migrating to cloud, but managing cloud. Managing cloud is a much bigger challenge than migrating to cloud because as you move, you realize that hybrid or multi-cloud or what to take, what to get back. And I think a lot of these things we will discover as we go along.
Sure.
But nevertheless, just to answer that last point on analytics, my take is AI and ML is core to what financial service is all about.
Sure. Sure.
And increasingly, we'll see a lot more happening in this space, not just in customer end, but also risk, credit, delinquencies, and a lot of other use cases that we are facing.
Sure. Sure. Great, Mr. Sharma. I think we have Mr. Bhasin with us now. Can you hear me, Mr. Bhasin?
Yeah. Hi, good evening, Yashwendra. I can hear you.
Good evening, Mr. Bhasin. Nice to have you. So we were discussing about cloud. What are your thoughts on cloud, basically, sir? Because, we've already seen its potential during the pandemic, how it was able to take on the load of video conferencing, collaboration, all those solutions. But there are certainly some key challenges, as well as opportunities, of course, that organizations need to be cognizant of as they adopt cloud. Like Mr. Sharma, just talked about how managing cloud is more critical than, just going to the cloud. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you are right. Actually, it is very easy to say, moving to cloud is some of the, it has been the kind of a fashion, we can say, or it has been the fashion statement or fad in recent past few years. But definitely, the provisioning the cloud in a right way is not a very novice job. It is a skilled job, and for that you need to have the staff which is cloud architecture aware. So skill set is a big ask actually while you are trying to migrate to the cloud, as well as when you look at the non-functional areas, because very easy to say that auto scaling and auto provisioning is easily available on the cloud. So, but how to deploy the services which how to optimize the overall cost of deployment is also one of the key area, because you may, as we are talking about, the cloud migration and, having the leveraging the cloud for, busting any kind of a large or sudden loads. But at the same time, when you are, what loads to be taken really, what data needs to be taken over there, there has to be a policy. That one of the, right now I'm also coming out of a meeting where people are discussing that, India does not have a data protection law. So if we take the data on the cloud, how I'm going to be protected if data, in spite of the data centers being on, within the geographical limits of India, if any data gets, mishandled and that comes out in the media, as a responsible financial services organization, how would I be viewed? Can I take action on the cloud service provider? Will it follow the rules of the law of this land, or will they follow the rules of wherever their parent organization is, whether it is US, UK, or any other part of the world? So these are some of the other questions are there. Then while building, provisioning the right amount of security, whether you are enabling, as we discussed on the cloud, multi-factor authentication or biometric authentication. So these are the other, which are the non-functional challenges are much more higher on the cloud. And a lot of people are, not able to manage the multi-cloud as well. So in the multi-cloud scenario, you how the security infrastructure is going to span across multi-cloud. So like we have today many service providers who have tied up with the multi-cloud, with the various clouds, like whether AWS, Azure, Oracle. They are saying you are on-premise as well, and you could be on public cloud. You have a seamless, kind of a fabric built across from the private cloud on-premise to the public cloud, and you can seamlessly migrate your loads, swing your loads from cloud A to cloud B or cloud C, and similarly you can bring them back as well. But staying is a lot easier, really execution. When you look at the infrastructure, a lot of discipline is also required. When you want to leverage these features, so you cannot, you have to keep on updating yourself in your on-premise cloud. The way, how are you running your on-premise cloud? Whether those on-premise cloud load can be swung to the public cloud in a seamless manner. Like if somebody is using a vSAN based architecture, or somebody is using SAN based architecture, and then take them to the public cloud, which is totally based on a, kind of a SAN virtualization based architecture. There are a lot of differences also are there on various tiers and layers of the cloud.
Mr. Bhasin.
So that is also one challenge, but there are a lot of boons as well. Like we can see in the current pandemic scenario, apart from collaboration, when we have enabled people to have a remote desktops, and we have routed the entire security through the cloud. And
Mr. Bhasin.
And similarly, when it has to be like developers need to be enabled the environment where we could not supply them any desktop or laptops. We enabled them on a hybrid or a public cloud, so that at least they can access the development environments from anywhere. So those activities did not get implemented. So there are pros and cons for everything.
Sure, Mr. Bhasin. Great. I'll come to you, Archie. Whenever we talk about cloud, we obviously have to talk about security, right? Just to throw you a data point, according to a Google post, in April, Google Gmail saw 18 million daily malware and phishing emails related to COVID-19. What are your thoughts on zero trust model? Because, it's making a lot of waves these days. Do you think that is the answer to, security?
Look, Intel, like any other large corporation, right? We're obviously, looking at zero trust in a highly complex environment, right? To understand where it's most applicable and where we, get the greatest value in terms of risk reduction. So look, we've enabled, our employees to work remotely for many years. security has always been a priority for us at Intel, right? And we've always made sure that we have the right security controls and models, even in a pre-COVID-19 time frame. And obviously, since COVID-19, there's some, additional, things that we worry about or we think about. So our security posture and, defense, and we have, great depth in our strategy that hasn't changed, right? We want to ensure end-to-end security across, all of our infrastructure, all the platforms, the applications, devices. And we've had that, and we continue to do that, and we continue to think about how to strengthen and mature as time goes on. So I would say that, I would echo some of the comments from my colleagues that, we're doing it at much larger scale now. We're doing it in environments that are, scattered, right, between public cloud, on-prem, sometimes colo, et cetera. And so the focus areas that we're thinking about, honestly, right now are security at home, right, because we've blurred the lines between work and home, which is forcing us, right, to, think about how we balance, the flexibility, the risk. We've trained all of our employees to be more vigilant and take additional care, right, as we're in this environment. But at the end of the day, let me just give some examples here. Everything that we monitor on our networks or on our devices, right? Now as people are home and that usage has expanded, we'll pick up their home, home network, right? And their Wi-Fi and everything that's on there, right? It could be a refrigerator, it could be a thermostat. And so, as you're thinking about all that information and that data, where do you draw the line, right? And at the same time, you need to protect, your companies. And so, those are, that's one area that I'd say security at home and how kind of it blends in is a big deal. Some of the risks with, downloading, right, of unlicensed, unacceptable software, sensitive personal data that, could be brought back into a company asset. We're strengthening our personal usage, policy to, address some of that. Cloud security, it's multiple colleagues of mine have brought it up, but it is a big concern and at the forefront, right? So as we use, multiple, public, cloud providers, and we think about more and more SaaS, right? We need to be concerned with that end-to-end, data encryption, both in transit and at rest. And so that may be going across multiple solutions, multiple providers. And so, how do we ensure, right, that we've got that? And obviously VPN, is a way for us to, force a lot of that capability and traffic and data monitoring through. For us, it's been making sure that all of our employees could get connected through it to make sure that we balance, regional capacity, and then we optimize in each of the regions, and then we've got full, global redundancy. Having said that, right, VPN has, obviously allowed us a way to make sure, that we can, have a secure connection, that we can, monitor, that we can optimize experiences, et cetera. But our workforce, right, and our partners obviously have more and more of a desire or need to think about VPN less, right? So those are, some of the, things as we think about enabling some of that VPN less, how do we make sure, back to your question about, that trust and that zero trust, how do we ensure some of those things working together? And look, I mean, we can talk about this one topic for, for a long time here, but I think, top of mind, since, COVID-19 hit is really, what's going on at home and how do we, kind of manage and control, and where do we draw the line? How do we get more robust on the cloud security? How do we get more robust, around, again, VPN does put, an extra load sometimes on performance. And so how do we think about, what can be VPN less and what needs to go through, VPN? So those would be some of the things that, what we're thinking about, from an Intel perspective of, how do we continue to, feel comfortable, right, that we've got the right security and capabilities, to be able to continue and mature what we're doing.
Great input, Sachi, there. I'll now move to Mr. Mazumdar. Mr. Mazumdar, true safety is really about knowing that the data in your enterprise is in compliance with all the regulations. Your thoughts on enterprise security in these times?
As Archie said, I think this is one topic on which we can probably spend this entire hour and more, and not just cover the basics. But I think compliance is compliance is not just about being compliant to the local laws. Companies like ours operate in more than 54 countries. We have associates working in more than 70 countries across the world, and we have more than 450,000 of them. So it sometimes really creates a significant challenge in terms of just being compliant to the local laws. But I think security is much beyond that. Security is dependent on, I mean, you kept on using the word zero trust. Security comes in layers, and we need to build multiple layers of, as you build your firewalls and you build your security posture. Zero trust is one effective weapon, effective part of that overall security posture, but it is not just a zero trust model. It is about building and ensuring that all those layers are in place, and actually having the rigor of testing it on a regular basis. I'll tell you, some of the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis. I mean, as people work out of their homes, many times you start using your personal devices to do official work. Same device, being used by, the spouses who may be working for competing organizations. And how do you manage such situations? I mean, those are real situations that we have to face on a day-to-day basis. We have been using technologies like VPN to protect all our endpoints. We have been using a lot of VDI, which has really, enabled us to give our associates an ability to use personal devices. But all said and done, we need to make sure that we have put down our SOPs, and we are running through those SOPs every day, and ensuring that we are having the right rigor in place, rigors of having all the right patches in place, rigor of ensuring that we are monitoring and not allowing the signal from the noise, because there's a lot of noise that is out there. Just today, we heard the government in Australia talk about non-state actors. You saw some notifications yesterday from Government of India. There is a significant amount of cybersecurity challenges out there. So we have to keep monitoring and keep ensuring that our defenses are up, and we are making sure that we are doing the right thing.
Sure, Mr. Mazumdar. I'll go back to Mr. Malia here now. Mr. Malia, you've heard top technology leaders talk about trends, opportunities, and challenges confronting them. Can you talk a little bit more about how Intel has been working with enterprises in the country to help them on their digital transformation journey and prepare them for the future?
Sure, Yashwendra. I'll start with saying that I honestly do not know where this pandemic would lead us. But history can definitely teach us. And given its pandemic time, it has given us all a little more time for reading. So I'm right in the middle of a book called The Innovators, written by Walter Isaacson. I would strongly recommend the audience to check it out. It's 150-year history on technology. And what it tells us is a couple of things. One, there is time and place for everything. So when you look at PC industry, PC and internet evolved separately, but came together. It just exploded into PCs becoming the center of digital revolution, and PCs coming into the homes of everybody on the planet, right? And when you added phones to it, internet accelerated even further. So you can say the technology is supposed to be built for a particular thing. It evolves very differently. Historical evidence proves us that. So when you look at this construct of pandemic, I do think we have always talked about digital transformation, but time has come where digital transformation would just accelerate, in my opinion, because the technology exists, the infrastructure is improved dramatically, most parts of the world. India is no different. And all the esteemed panelists talked about it in different points of view, security, agility, all of it. And when you look at digital transformation, the critical part of that puzzle is infrastructure. And infrastructure is what gives you agility, flexibility, security, scalability, all the aspects that the panelists talked about. So our engagement as Intel is two-front. One, engage directly with our customers and partners to further the cause of building infrastructure agility in their path towards digital transformation. I can give you a few examples of that. National Stock Exchange. We did engineering engagements with them to performance optimize their core trading platform. State Bank of India. We consolidated 25,000 plus servers into a single private cloud, which is one of the largest clouds that you see in financial services sector in India. Mahindra and Mahindra analytics projects, we have closely collaborated with Mr. Ghosh and his team. Similarly, with global partners, TCS is a great example. Ignio is a solution that TCS has brought forward to their global set of customers, and we have collaborated very closely with them on reducing time for face recognition in Ignio platform. So that's another instance of infrastructure on how it can impact the end solution on digital transformation. So these are direct customer engagements. The engagement also for us as Intel is how do we raise boards for all boards for the ecosystem? And PC Pathshala, an initiative we have launched a couple of weeks back, is a great example of that. PC Pathshala is coming together of all our OEM customers, some startups, content providers, towards the cause of online learning, because this pandemic has forced all of us to really reimagine online learning and drive educational outcomes to the best extent we can. Because it is this time where parents, teachers, and students all will have to think very differently on online learning. So PC Pathshala is a great way of we bringing together that ecosystem towards the cause of all the three constituents of education: parents, students, and teachers. So like I said, digital transformation accelerates. Infrastructure is a very critical piece of it. And we do infrastructure very well as an innovation and infrastructure company. And we directly engage with customers, some examples I gave you, and partners. And we also raise all boards for the ecosystem.
Sure, Mr. Malia. I just had a look at the watch and I realized that the discussion has been going on for more than an hour now. So in the interest of time, I'll just ask one more question and then we open up the session for Q&A from attendees. So one final question to all the panelists, starting with you, Mr. Mazumdar. How should CIOs plan for the post-COVID-19 era and prepare their companies to be future-ready enterprises? I'll request all of you to be very brief, not more than a couple of minutes, each one of you, please. Mr. Mazumdar.
So you are asking a question which I can write a thesis on and saying, be very brief.
I'm sure.
I think, all I can say is we have to keep an open mind and make sure that our leadership has trust in our ability to bring technology to transform the organization the way it needs to going forward. I think that's as open as I can say at this point of time without being very specific.
Sure. Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Mazumdar. Archie.
Okay, 4 things, just a quick rundown, right? So I'd say first is, really think about what we've learned, right? And analyze the learnings from the crisis. I think, it's a good starting point in terms of thinking about how the future has changed and what we do differently. Second is adopt a customer first mentality, right? You can't fail if you're really operating from, a customer viewpoint and really think about, more of that imagination, right, of where we go with the customer and how we bring a different type of value into the future. The third is acknowledge that the world has changed. And I think that, a lot of my colleagues have talked about, this affords us an opportunity, I think, acceleration. I know a lot of concern around short-term investments, but I think a lot of the things that we've all talked about for, many years, I think we are going to have an opportunity to accelerate because I think there won't be a choice. And so acknowledge that it's changed and really embrace it. And the last would really be, as I look at large companies like mine at Intel, right? I think the opportunity to really invest and encourage employee innovation, because they're very close, right? In large organizations, our employees are very close to what's going on. And I think they can define more of the game-changing opportunities instead of looking at, innovation coming out of a technology group or top down in an organization. So I'd say those are the four that are kind of top of mind for me this morning.
Sure, Archie. Mr. Ghosh.
Yeah, I think the first thing that has to be thought of is what worked yesterday wouldn't work tomorrow, or what is working today will not work tomorrow. So open your mind. That's the first thing that is required. Second, you have to be extremely agile, because the environment and the opportunities and everything will be shifting very quickly. So the grabbing opportunities and making the best utilization of those opportunities is something that the CIOs will have to be very, very adept now, compared to much more than what everybody has done in the past. Second, probably looking at the way things are likely to change, and the speed at which it will change. Make small bets, but have a long-term vision. Against that, make small bets in order to get. And the fourth one, I would say, you have to look at getting your returns much quicker. There is no opportunity of a 3-year ROI on any investment now. It has to be in a couple of months. Otherwise, it will become very, very difficult, because in an uncertain environment, you don't want to make investment for long term, because things may change very rapidly, and making the investment and whole effort obsolete very fast.
Sure, Mr. Ghosh. Mr. Sharma, your thoughts, sir.
Yeah, so I would say three things. One is, I think, as CIO, first and foremost, is to connect with the firm's broader strategy, because the technology, the whole prioritization has to be relevant to where the firm is seeing its pain or where firm sees its opportunity. That means revisit both the short-term and medium-term priorities, as one would have listed down, because a lot of those priorities may probably not be relevant or can go probably for a later revisit. And the third is focus on what will not change irrespective of times. For example, looking at security, agility, cost consciousness, that means relooking at contracts, relooking at systems that are redundant, not to continue things, taking a hard call on everything that is around cost. The responsiveness, reskilling, and foremost innovation, because I think irrespective of whatever times we are living in, I think there will always be a premium for innovation.
Sure, definitely. Mr. Bhasin, final comments from you.
Yeah, I think I will maybe talk about a little more in the concrete ground state. I will say that I think one is a device strategy. I think people have to really look at very closely that what is going to be my device strategy going post-pandemic, and that has to be made robust from security perspective, and various kinds of cybersecurity measures already taken into account, so that people are enabled to work from anywhere really, and continue as their biometric authentication can also take place, so that they are always authenticated that only the authentic person is working remotely. And the second area is which is very, very important, that transforming the business processes and making them more and more digital, and that is going to be the number 2 and very high priority. And number 3, making the things digital. People have to really look at the third piece is legacy architectures, how to move them to the ready for the newer architecture, modern applications architecture. So that these are the 3 key priorities I see for CIOs.
Sure. Great, Mr. Bhasin. Mr. Malia, any final thoughts, any final comments from you?
I think the panelists summarized it very well, and we are short on time. But I would end with I'm a big Andy Grove fan, not because I'm with Intel, but it's just that he's such a fantastic management thinker. And he said something that resonates with me every single day during this crisis. And it's relevant for all companies. And he said as follows: bad companies are destroyed by crisis. Good companies survive them, and great companies are improved by them. So the real challenge for all of us would be, how do we look at this crisis, and how do we really force ourselves as an organization to come out stronger from this pandemic? It won't be easy, but it's not going to be impossible.
Great, amazing inputs from all of you panelists. We'll now open the session for Q&A from attendees. We've got lots of questions already for all of you, but in the interest of time, we've already shot the timeline by some margin. So we'll just take a couple of questions. The first question is for Mr. Ghosh. While work from home scenario suits well for non-physical content, how has automobile industry adjusted or plans to adjust its shop floor automation / industrial IT for a work from home scenario? Usually the industrial IT is hidden behind the firewall and it seldom leaves enterprise network.
Yeah, so I think as I mentioned earlier in the discussion, manufacturing is extremely physical activity, right? Only thing, there was a lot of things around that was also considered physical, which is kind of gone off today, or people have understood that it is not actually required to be as much physical as it is required. So having said that, the whole the what we would call the OT part of it in the manufacturing, that portion will remain inside, because I don't think there is any need to expose that outside. But what will happen, definitely, the data that is required for analytics, for machine learning, in order to build in some intelligence, that in an aggregated form will come out of the OT much more. And that is what will be available for, you can call it work from home. I prefer to call it work from anywhere, is what we should look forward to see that. Otherwise, the core of the manufacturing, as on date, there is no need to get an access. Having said that, there are a couple of situation in which it doesn't happen. For example, it's been a long-standing practice that a lot of equipment which has a maybe a supplier outside the country actually connects for sometimes firmware upgrade, sometimes software upgrade, sometimes troubleshooting. That kind of thing is very different, and that will continue. That is very different from work from anywhere that we are considering today.
The last question is for you, Mr. Mazumdar. How will the workspace management undergo a change in these times? What are the strategies and technologies being looked at? How do you generate budgets / cash flows for investments during these cost optimization periods?
So I think I'll take the last part first. I think budget is in everybody's mind as all our companies try to save cash. And what I would like to say is that we are all adopting the basic principles of Agile, which is to say we are focused on delivering incremental value to business. Instead of doing a mega project with a huge timeline to deliver the complete value, we are looking at delivering it in small chunks, but chunks that delivers specific business value. And that is one of the key strategies that we are adopting as an enterprise Agile organization. In terms of the other question that you asked about collaboration software, actually, I think collaboration is going to be augmented significantly with AR and VR technologies. We are already seeing some parts of it in our labs, and I think as we go forward, it will become much more real. And with higher bandwidth being available, 5G being available over 18 to 24 months time frame, I believe that such things will make us collaborate, sitting from our offices, sitting from our homes, feel like we are sitting next to each other. I think that's where we are going with the new technologies coming out.
Right, Mr. Mazumdar. Archie, we've got loads of questions for you. and I will have to ask one question to you before we end this session. So this one is for you, Archie. While Intel invests heavily in cutting-edge technology, how can Intel support customers in the present situation?
I think Prakash hit on this a little bit, right? I think a lot of it, during the COVID-19 was the immediate needs, right? In terms of, if I look at, I'm on the board of Cognizant, do a lot of work with a lot of the providers in India. And I'd say that, the readiness, even, from a work from home perspective, even with devices or building up of, capacity in data centers, all of that, we certainly saw a short-term, burst, right? In our customers' needs, and how do we help them, through the pandemic. I think coming out of the pandemic, we've talked a lot this morning about, the world has changed, and for a lot of our customers, right, no matter where they are, if they're in a business where it's been completely, come to a standstill, all the way up to, businesses that have actually had opportunity during this time frame. I think Intel's, we partner with our customers, like Prakash said, to really understand, no matter which end of the spectrum they're on, how do we help them with acceleration of their strategies and their plans, and and for them to be relevant in the markets that they play in. And so I think you heard a lot this morning about, technology playing such a critical role. And I think Intel is bringing that type of, technology partnership to help customers accelerate, their plans, irrespective of where they may fall on that spectrum. So to keep it short, I'd probably stop here with that.
Thank you, Archie. That's all we have time for. We hope the insights shared by the expert panelists on the opportunities, challenges, technologies, and the way forward in creating a digital infrastructure will go a long way in enabling your organizations to tide over disruptions and be future ready. I would again like to thank all our panelists for their wonderful insights, and also our attendees for sparing time for this session. Thank you very much, and have a good day ahead, Archie.